Hey everybody, and welcome back to Storytime with JRP. We're continuing our book, Laurence Grey, Secret of the Lost Roanoke Colony, and we're currently in chapter 41. Now, as you may notice, I'm wearing more casual clothing, and that is because it is a really hot summer day outside. I don't think I can get on my nice clothes today, and also there's background noise because there's a fan as well, so I'm sorry about that. But let's get into a brief recap of the previous chapter, which remember are twice as much lengths. Basically, the conclusion is that the son, Jason, from another reality, tells his other reality father, Grey, that basically they need to stop General Sheldon or he's going to cause World War III. That's basically what's happening. But the problem is that he has to choose between saving his son or saving the world, because he can't have both. So that's where we last left off. So let's get into that now in chapter 41, titled Closing In on Roanoke. Laurence Grey rematerialized back at Area 51, a mere 2 seconds after he left. General Sheldon was still in the process of turning away to leave the room. "I'm back, General," stated Grey, "and I have the next clue." Sheldon was unfazed. "Great. Oh, great. How long were you gone?" Grey laughed. About 2 seconds." Sheldon frowned. "I mean, how long were you in 1673? Grey shrugged. "I don't know, about 3 hours. Why?" Sheldon became smug. "You don't really have time for an explanation, Grey. You only have 8.5 hours. "What?" exclaimed Grey. Sheldon smiled evilly. "That's half an hour you spent before you left, and 3 hours in 1673. Oh, and subtract about 5 minutes for us talking right now." Grey was furious. He swung at Sheldon and made contact right on Sheldon's jaw. Sheldon flew back and hit the floor hard. He was nearly unconscious, but he managed to say, "You just lost 3.5 more hours for that." He then blacked out. Grey was fuming. He wanted to do more to Sheldon, but the guards had finally come to their senses and restrained Grey. They threw him back in the cell from which he technically had just left a few minutes ago. Once the guards walked away, Grey looked at the latest clue for the first time and read it aloud. "A place which trees and flowers abound, and yet a place where reading can be found. On the coast is where a ton of hunting is. Find the tree that has no green, with it 2 rocks, not 1, not 3. That's where the clue ended. Grey had to think fast. He only had 4.75 hours remaining. "Let's see," he thought. "Reading. That can be a bookstore or a library, but somehow intermingled with a forest and perhaps a park? A park where people can read? Ugh, that could be anywhere. But, okay, well, on the coast with a ton of hunting, whatever that means. Wait, ton, hunting, ton, hunting, ton, Huntington Library. Oh, of course. Now I'll just need to grab that dead tree." Grey ran to the door of his cell. "Let me out. I know where the next clue is." The guards led him to Sheldon. Grey blurted, "Get the platoon ready. We're heading to Huntington Library." Sheldon just stared. "The Huntington Library? Really? Well, it's Grey's own time he's wasting, so whatever." "All right, troops. Gather on the cargo jet. I want my entire elite assassin force on the trip. And Grey, for your sake, you better be right in your interpretation of the clue. How would 1600s aliens know about the Huntington Library?" Grey steeled his eyes. "Trust me. Now let's go." So Grey, Sheldon, and 8 of Area 51's finest combat soldiers and sharpshooters boarded the massive cargo jet. The trip would take 2 hours, cutting Jason's remaining time to live nearly in half. Grey knew it would be a close shave. The men at Area 51 would still suck the air out of Jason's room on schedule, whether Sheldon was there or not. Only a direct order from Sheldon would stop this. Grey may be only 2 hours away from being alone. 2 hours later, as expected, the jet touched down at LAX airport. Grey, not wasting any time, leapt out of his airplane seat and dashed out of the airport. With airports taking so much time for security checks like they do, Laurence only had 1.75 hours left. He quickly hailed a cab and they all leapt in. "Hit the gas, driver!" yelled Grey. "Get us to the Huntington Library, immediately!" The taxi driver, apparently, was dead set on getting a tip, so he drove like a maniac. From driving around slower cars, to driving on the wrong side of the road even, Mr. Jose Gonzalez would not be stopped. They arrived at the Huntington Library after driving a mere 15 minutes, a journey which should have taken an hour. As they were getting out, which was a challenge, since there were 11 people in one taxi, Grey asked Jose a question. "Hey, Mr. Gonzalez, care to join our party?" Jose was uncertain, but then Grey said, "You can be our official driver." Gonzalez perked up. "Certainly, sir. You have a deal." The 5-foot Mexican man felt very good about the deal he had made, but he was unaware of the previous antics of General Sheldon. The 8 assassins, 2 civilians, and 1 general together walked into the Huntington Library, not sure of what to look for or how to find it, and there wasn't much time left. After paying a fee, Laurence Grey and the rest of the group rushed into the Huntington Library, with only 90 minutes left for Jason's life. He didn't know where to look. He began randomly running from tree to tree, some with and without leaves, with and without rocks. Jose Gonzalez joined Grey in the latter's search. The former was being paid, after all. Sheldon and his group of masked assassins just watched. Although Sheldon wanted to find the colony, he had nothing to lose. Grey needed a motivation, and a consequence if he failed. The question is, how could Sheldon continue to motivate Grey if Grey's son died? He'd have nothing left. After 20 minutes of searching, Grey became hysterical. He would not, no, could not, lose his son. First, his wife a year ago, then his friend Jack Larrabee a week ago, and in just 70 minutes, Jason. He ran to Sheldon and dropped to his knees. "Please, General, help me out," screamed Grey. "I can't lose my son." Sheldon smiled knowingly. "All right, Grey, I help you. You seem to have missed a part of the clue. You found the word Huntington in the clue, but failed to notice the word coast. I can see why you thought it was the library because of the mentioning in the clue of reading, but I believe that is referring to a library in Huntington as the city instead of the Huntington Library, which is here in San Marino. Certainly not on the coast." Grey's eyes widened. He wanted to say something, but he just couldn't get over the shock. This was a major setback he had made. Getting to the real Huntington Library from here would take 50 minutes, if not more. That would only leave Grey a mere 20 minutes of search time, and then it would be all over for Jason. If Grey was not already on his knees, he would have fallen on them. He nodded his head in defeat. There was just no beating Sheldon. The general, presently, was still staring at the crumpled form of Grey. He gestured to his assassin guards. "Come, my elites, give Grey some time. After all, it is his time, not ours." After Sheldon and his elite force walked away, cab driver Jose Gonzalez knelt down next to Grey. "Mr. Grey," Jose began, "I've only known you for a short time, but I can already understand your situation. But don't lose hope. It's your son, and you should do all you can for him until it is really too late. Don't give up now." Grey was still looking down, but a fire ignited inside of him. He stood up dramatically, and then realized he'd only have 15 minutes of search time once he got to Huntington once again, and became depressed again. Jose noticed Grey's gloominess and said, "Come now, I'm sure that Sheldon man is a bit flexible. Strike a deal with him." Because of his knowledge of Sheldon's actions, Grey immediately began shaking his head. But then, something Mr. Gonzalez said suddenly struck a chord in his brain. What was it? Sheldon. That's it! Laurence Grey cracked a smile and shook the taxi driver's hand. "Thanks, Jose. You just reminded me of a bargaining chip that just might work." Jose grinned. "No problem, Lawrence. Come, let's find the thing and save your son." As expected, even with Jose's crazy driving, the trip to Huntington Beach took 50 minutes. Walking to the city's main library, Sheldon was surprised to see Laurence just strolling up to the library, considering he only had 15 minutes to save Jason. "What's the holdup, Grey?" Sheldon queried. Grey smiled conspiratorially. Speaking of that, General, can I speak to you in private?" Sheldon nodded. Sure." He grabbed a gun from one of his assassins. Grey raised an eyebrow. Sheldon noticed and said, "Hey, you never know what terrorists like you would do when you have the chance." Grey clenched his fists. "I told you, I'm not a..." But he was interrupted by Sheldon's stop sign hand gesture. "Save it, Grey. Talk to the hand." They stepped inside a study room in the library. "All right, what's up?" asked Sheldon. Grey smiled evilly. Yeah, he finally gets to smile like that. "I know who you really are, Philip Swanson. And if you don't do what I'll say, I'll prove it to everyone." General Phil Sheldon, a.k.a. Philip Swanson, furrowed his brows in response to Laurence Grey's ultimatum. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Grey rolled his eyes. "Don't even try that on me, Swanson. I've heard 'em all. I saw the look of recognition on your face when I mentioned the name when we were at Arizona Crater." But Sheldon would not get in. "Hey, I study colonial criminals all the time. Doesn't everyone? I even have an honorary doctorate from university." Arms crossed, Grey asked, "Which one?" "Oh, a certain one in Arizona," trailed off Sheldon. Grey waved him. Well, that explains it. Then he slapped his head. Congrats, you got me off the subject, Sheldon, but it's time we got back to it. How did you... Just then, Sheldon whipped out his gun and smashed it against the side of Gray's head. Now listen here, Gray, began the much more confident Sheldon. If you as much think about that name again, I'm going to... You're gonna what? Kill me? Laughed Gray. You know better. Only I can read the alien clues. I'll probably be the only one that can open the alien sheds inside. You need me. For a moment, Sheldon's confidence faltered, and that's all Gray needed. He grabbed Sheldon's gun and pointed it at his head. Now, General, said Gray, it's either death for you now, or more time to find Roanoke before Jason dies. Sheldon remained silent, but then Gray took the safety off the gun. All right, stammered Gray. 15 more minutes. That's absurd, replied Gray. Make it 2 hours. Half an hour. 90 minutes. 1 hour. Okay, deal, finished Gray in his back and forth. Starting now. Sheldon grabbed the gun back. That's counting the time you had left from any previous countdown. Huh, fine, responded Gray. They both walked out of the study room. They were immediately joined by the 8 assassins and Jose Gonzalez. It didn't take long to search the rather small one-story library. The search party, however, came up empty. Sheldon and Gonzalez were clueless, but Gray had an idea. He stepped up to the librarian, who was about Gray's age, and asked, How long has this library been here? The librarian, who was one of those typical types, was glad to get any attention at all. She said, The library's been here since 1851, a couple years after the gold rush began. This was a red flag for Gray, who turned to Sheldon and exclaimed, That's exactly 200 years after Roanoke disappeared. The aliens had already proven they can travel through time, so perhaps they added the clue about the library later, because no one was picking up on their previous clue. Sheldon scratched his head. I guess it is possible. What I don't understand is how this makes sense. I believe the play on words, ton of hunting, that led us here. But what do the other parts mean? A tree with no green? 2 rocks? It's hopeless. While Sheldon was rambling on, it struck a chord in Gray's mind. He raced back to the librarian. Tell me, has the library always looked like this since 1851? The librarian shook her head. Not at all. They remodeled it in 1960 and sealed off a few wings of the library due to budget cuts. It would cost too much money to tear them down, so they're still there, empty. Gray began to stare off into space, eyes wide. Jose Gonzalez stepped up. What is it, Laurence? Tell us. Suddenly, Gray snapped out of it. He sprinted towards a random aisle of the library and began scanning the books. A little group of assassins, generals, and taxi drivers followed him. Gray? Asked Gonzalez. What are you looking for? Why are we in this modern buildings category? It probably isn't the time to check out a book. Suddenly, Gray stopped. He reached for a book. The Urban Jungle. Why Trees Are No Longer Green, he said. Everyone watched in silence. Hey, wasn't that part of the clue? Dumbly asked Gonzalez. No one responded. Gray opened the book. The first page had a picture of 2 rocks on it. The space where the book had once rested on the shelf was empty, upon first glance. Gray discovered what looked like a tiny finger scanner on the back of the bookcase. He put his thumb on it, and suddenly the whole bookcase and part of the floor swiveled around, taking Gray and company to places unknown. Just like a sesame, the bookshelf turned all the way around to the back of the wing, but they were not outside. This must be the lost wing of the library, said Gray in the inky blackness. A light flashed on. It was Jose's phone ringing with the Everything is Awesome ringtone. He answered, Hello? No pull today, Joe. I'm on a mission with this guy. No, I don't know too much about it, but I do know I'll be rich from all the time I've been spending with him. Well, the lead guy here is General Sheldon, and Sheldon knocked the phone out of Jose's hand. Once again, it was completely dark. Then Sheldon shot the phone. We can't have outsiders knowing what's going on, Gonzalez. Watch your mouth. Someone turned on a flashlight. It was one of the assassins. Then Sheldon turned on his own, followed by another. Gray raised an eyebrow. Sheldon shrugged. I'd like to be prepared. Finally, the flashlight scanned around the group. It became obvious that, in all the confusion, the other 6 assassins were left on the other side. Only Jose, Laurence, Sheldon, and 2 assassins from here were left. Then the beams of light traced out into the darkness. There were multiple old bookcases, all empty. It was a fairly large room, perhaps 100 square feet. It had been untouched for over 50 years. Dust, cobwebs, and disorder plagued the room. Tables lay overturned, chairs on their sides. Spread out, ordered Sheldon. We weren't led here by accident. If you find anything, give a yell." The five split up, going down separate aisles. Grey could barely see, since he was the only one without a flashlight. Upon thoroughly searching the shelves, he discovered a lone book on the bottom shelf in the corner. The second he touched the book, the room began to vibrate. A large trapdoor sprung open next to him, revealing an even more complete and utter darkness. "Guys, over here!" He looked around and found a convenient ladder and a rope on a nearby wall. The two assassins, Jose and Sheldon, reached Grey and the trapdoor. Apparently, though, the second assassin didn't see the trapdoor and fell headlong into the dark pit. His fading scream was seared into the memories of the remaining four forever. Sheldon looked at Grey. "We go down from here." Everyone worked together to fasten the ladder to the floor, letting it hang into the hole. The rope was then tied to the edge of the ladder. "Assassin number 46, get down that ladder and rope," began Sheldon. "I want to see the depth of this hole." The assassin quickly jumped into the hole. When he got to the bottom of the rope, he dropped a flashlight into the pit below. It fell for a good 5 or 6 seconds, until a faint splash was heard. It was then that Grey heard the assassin's voice for the first time. "General," began the assassin, "the hole is approximately 220 feet in depth. I believe there is also an underground river below. We'll have to find a flotation device somewhere." It was evident to Grey that, strangely, the assassin was female. Oh, I gave it a male voice earlier, so pretend I had a female voice just now. But Grey didn't have time to ponder the irregularity of that detail, because at that moment, Jose yelled out, "I found an inflatable raft!" Great, responded Sheldon. "This is going to be tricky. The inflatable raft, when inflated, is clearly bigger than the opening to the hole. We'll have to open it in the hole and sort of jump onto it as it's falling." But by this time, the assassin finished climbing out of the hole. "I highly advise against that, General. The odds are near impossible of all four of us successfully leaping onto the raft." Sheldon shook his head. "I'm aware of that, but it's what we have to do." Just then, Grey spoke up. "Wait, I found another inflatable raft." "Good," said Sheldon. "You and me will go first, then Assassin 46 and Gonzalez." "Well, okay, let's go now," replied Grey. "There's no time to waste." Sheldon nodded. "That's right. Jason only has 45 minutes left." They climbed down the ladder and slid partway down the rope. "Now, Grey," said Sheldon. Grey popped up on the raft. They both placed a hand on it. With a nod to each other, they leapt onto the raft and plummeted into the watery depths below. General Phil Sheldon, a.k.a. Philip Swanson, and Laurence Grey struggled to hang on to the inflatable raft as they fell at a startling speed into the pit below. As they fell, Sheldon became calm enough to say, "This better lead to Roanoke, Grey, or we'll be in a really bad mess." Grey looked over to his flailing companion. "Don't worry, General. I know what I'm doing." Grey quickly looked down. "Brace yourself!" Microseconds later, they and the raft struck the surface of a large underground river soundly. Grey plunged into the frigid water, but managed to hold onto the handle of the raft. He scrambled into it, soaking wet and freezing. He had thought ahead and had stored a mini lantern in the pouch of the raft. That was certainly a lifeline, since upon impact to the water, he had dropped his flashlight. He turned the lantern on and noticed for the first time an important detail. Sheldon was missing. Grey leaned over the other side of the raft to see a quickly fading flashlight. Grey's first instinct was to jump in and save Sheldon, but then he hesitated. Would this be for the best? Could he be free of Sheldon once and for all? But quickly, though, Grey realized what he should do, because he realized something. Sheldon held Jason's life in his hand. If Sheldon was dead, there would be no connection back to Area 51 to stop the execution of Jason in the event they don't find Roanoke in time. Even the remaining assassin wouldn't do any good. She didn't have the Sheldon's verification code, which anyway was voice-coded anyway. Having thought all this in a matter of seconds, Grey leapt into the icy water after Sheldon. He swam down for a while, then finally saw the gleam of the General's flashlight. He grabbed Sheldon's arm and began swimming with all his might. They were making progress, but not enough. The weight of Sheldon's heavy army clothes, as well as Grey's own, were taking a heavy toll on the rescuer. With the last ounce of strength, Laurence Grey made one final push for the surface, and made it. He dragged Sheldon's crumpled body onto the raft. Resting Sheldon on the side of the raft, Grey splashed some water onto the General's face. "General, wake up! Can you hear me?" Suddenly, Sheldon sputtered and spit out what seemed like a gallon of water. "Grey, you saved me." Grey nodded. "Indeed I did, General. Indeed I did." Having finally saved Sheldon, the pair finally took a good look at their surroundings. They were in a large pool of still water, about 50 yards in diameter. Gray looked up and could barely make out the light of a few flashlights and the ladder they had climbed down from. Sheldon took out his waterproof walkie-talkie from his pocket and flipped it on. "Assassin 46? The radio crackled to life for a few seconds. "Yes, General? Did you make it safely?" Sheldon grimaced. "Well, I wouldn't say it was safe, but we made it. You and Gonzalez can prepare to jump as well. First, though, throw down a pair of those oars I saw back up there." "Affirmative, General," replied the assassin. A few moments later, 2 oars sailed through the air and splashed into the water. Luckily, they were near enough to the raft, so Gray didn't have to dive into the cold water again to get them. Sheldon got back on the walkie-talkie. "Okay, man, go ahead and jump in 30 seconds from my mark. We'll be clear by then." Mark. Quickly, Gray and Sheldon each grabbed an oar and began to paddle. Gray wasn't certain, but he thought he saw the water somewhat drifting in one direction. Seconds later came the flailing forms of the assassin and Jose Gonzalez and the inflatable raft. All 3 slapped the water hard. A mere seconds went by, and then the assassin and Jose surfaced out of the water and climbed into the raft. "Hey, amigos," half-laughed Jose. "That was a bigger drop than I was expecting." Gray laughed, but Sheldon didn't. "Where are your oars?" You have them," replied Assassin 46. "We discovered after you jumped that each oar splits in 2. Gray examined his oar, and after some tugging, sure enough, split in 2. He threw the other halves to the other raft. Sheldon handed one of those halves to Gray. "Men, the water current indicates that this water, slowly, is going somewhere. Let's spread out and find its destination. Move out." The foursome quickly discovered a hidden cave entrance, which was the direction of the water current. The 2 rafts floated onto a subterranean entrance. Each raft had a mini lantern to light the way. From what they could see from the lanterns, the cave seemed to stretch on for miles. "To think this is all below the busy city of Huntington Beach," said Jose Gonzalez. "Who knew?" But suddenly, the water current really sped up. The rafts started bobbing up and down as small waves began to form under them. Luckily, the waves were forming with their direction, not against them. "If this turns out badly, Gray," strained the voice of Sheldon over the rapids, "I'm blaming it all on you." Gray laughed. "Yeah, I'm sure God would love it when you tell him why you wanted to find Roanoke." "What is that supposed to mean?" yelled Sheldon. Gray smugly grinned. "I know what the colony contains. Just criminals. Well, descendants of them. And if there's no regular colony inhabitants left, why are you so eager to find them?" For a moment, Sheldon looked surprised, but then resumed his general scowl. "That's not true, and even if it was, it's none of your business." "Look, I know about the sheds," shot back Gray. "I know you just want to get rich, but, newsflash, you have to be an honest explorer to unlock the good shed instead of the bad one. And even then, you're just assuming the reward in the good shed is financial." Sheldon gritted his teeth. "How'd you find out?" Gray hesitated. "Peter Folger told me." Sheldon slammed his fist down onto the raft. "That traitor! When I went to ask him—" "Wait," interrupted Gray. "You went back in time too?" "Of course," said Sheldon. "And he told me everything. But he told me no one could figure it out except the descendant of himself. When I sent you to see Folger, I wanted you to think you discovered the clues yourself. But I guess he told you much more than that." They stared at each other in stony silence. But then the water broke the standoff. There was a waterfall ahead. The rapids sped up at a faster rate than ever, and Gray knew there was not much chance that they would survive the drop. The 2 rafts grew ever closer to the precipice, and they were about to fly off the edge. But then they didn't. As the 2 rafts went past the supposed edge, the view of the cave flickered from a waterfall to a dry cave. The water drained into what looked like man-made drains into the ground. The rafts went from tilting side to side to bouncing around on dry cave floor, causing the 4 party members to go flying. After recovering from the strange occurrence, the group turned to look at the anomaly. How can a raging underwater river be stopped long enough to build drains on the ground?" asked Jose Gonzalez. Gray scratched his chin. "Well, the bigger problem is, who built them at all?" Sheldon stepped in. "It's a welcome sign. It was either the colonists or the aliens. We're on the right track." Jose looked confused. "Okay, can someone explain all this to me? I don't even know what we're looking for. All I know is that Gray's son is in danger, and I'm still getting paid. What do you mean, colonists or aliens?" "Well," began Gray, but he was cut off by Sheldon, who rammed a gun into Jose's chin.
Now look here, Gonzalez. We are about to tell you is top secret, and you'll be a national security risk if you tell anyone, and so will the people you tell. If you as much mention Roanoke to another human being, you'll be shot on sight. You get that?
Jose has nervously nodded. Gray proceeded to tell him everything. With all of Jose's questions answered, they moved on down the cave. The cave grew smaller, just tall enough to walk without ducking, and wide enough for all four of them to walk side by side. The cave suddenly became a long stairway, going up. Jose, having just heard an incredible story from Gray, didn't ask any questions. When they got to the top of the stairway, they beheld a long-awaited sight, the Lost Colony of Roanoke. But their happiness quickly faded when they stepped forward, because it was another mirage and the image changed. Now it was just a vast canyon with very small rock towers dispersed through the middle of it. "Look," said General Sheldon, each rock in each row has a Roman numeral from 1 to 10 on it." "Interesting," said Gray. "Looks like it will need the right combination." Everyone looked to Gray. Gray shrugged. "What?" Jose Gonzalez stepped up.
"You're the descendant. Only you know the combination."
Gray was silent for a while, then said, "Well, before I do anything, let's see what will happen if we step on the wrong rock." Gray then picked up a pebble and threw it onto one of the rock towers. Immediately, a massive explosion threw pieces of the former rock tower everywhere, knocking a few other towers down with it. Everyone gulped, but Gray didn't skip a beat. "I know the combination. It's 021314. The date I found about the Roanoke Colony." Sheldon sighed.
"Well, let's just hope you're right. Gonzalez, you go first."
Jose quietly stepped onto the first rock of the 6 he would have to step on. Nothing happened. He made it through the first 3 rock towers without any problem. He was just about to step on the next one when Gray cried out, "Wait, I forgot that I didn't find out until after midnight, so it was actually the next day, the 14th. But Jose looked down and saw that he had already had 1 foot on the wrong rock. "Thanks, Gray. It was fun." With that, Jose Gonzalez put his other foot on the rock, and he and the rock around him erupted into another huge explosion. "Jose, no!" screamed Gray, but it was already too late. After a few seconds of silence, Sheldon said,
"This better be the right combination, Gray. Assassin, you go next."
The assassin went and made it across with no problem. Sheldon and Gray followed. Gray is still silent since the explosion. Now, here again, they saw Roanoke, but when they stepped forward, they knew, this time, it was real. Gray almost wanted to get out his phone and play National Treasure music. After getting over their awe, the group began analyzing the situation. The city was lit up by countless candles, which must be lit 24/7, apparently. By the design of the houses, it was obvious that, even though they still had the 1600s design to them, that they were built like a fort, just like a criminal would want. Obviously, the original Roanoke criminals had taught their trade to their descendants, and their descendants to their descendants, and so on. Gray and party would have to be careful. When they stepped down some stairs, the first thing that they ran into was what they had heard about, the 2 sheds. A futuristic panel was in between the 2. Before Sheldon could approach it, Gray said, "All right, Phil, tell your goons to save Jason. I got you Roanoke, and a deal's a deal." Sheldon smiled wickedly.
"You think I care about your son, now that I have what I want?"
He threw the radio that had the connection to Area 51 on the ground and smashed it underneath his boot. "No!" screamed Gray. He was just about to punch Sheldon when the panel started speaking. "You are not an honest explorer, Phil Sheldon, aka Philip Swanson. Your punishment is that these people will be released among your people, and your people will see a war the likes of which no human has ever seen. You have 3 minutes to escape before they are released. Good luck." And that is it for chapter 47, guys. Just like that, exactly what the other Jason had predicted is about to come true. A huge horde of super criminals are going to be released upon the world. And can Gray do anything to stop it? Well, you'll have to find out in the next chapter, guys, which is coming tomorrow. Alright, I'll see you then.